Hey there, and welcome to the Jeffrey Van Dyke Show, a podcast for paradigm changers. Each week I speak with another influential leader who's changing the conversation for their audience, their industry, and this world. I am so glad you're here. Welcome to the show. All right. Welcome, everybody. This is the Jeffrey Van Dyke Show, and we have with us today Chandra Bozelko. I'm particularly excited about this conversation because she's got such a unique story. Chandra is a syndicated columnist, a freelance opinion writer, a thought leader who was imprisoned for over 6 years in a maximum security facility in Connecticut. While in prison, she started a newspaper column that the New Haven Independent called Prison Diaries. Prison Diaries she turned it into a blog. And you've won a number of awards for it. The Weebly Awards in 2018 and 2019. Your column, The Outlaw, now appears in over 150 daily and weekly newspapers. You've published over 300 opinion columns since 2004 in pretty much everywhere. Wall Street Journal, New York Times, USA Today, my hometown paper, the Los Angeles Times. I'm just really delighted you are here. Thank you for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Jeff. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So let's start with the story. When did you go to prison? What were your charges? How did that go down?
Well, it's a complicated story, but I'll try to simplify it. I went to prison on December 7th, 2007. And the circumstances of getting there were kind of fraught. And I think that's actually true for anybody who goes to prison. But from what I'm understanding through like some appeal processes and other proceedings that have happened since I've been home, is that mine was probably one for the books, right? Like, super crazy. So I had been charged in 2005 with allegedly using people's credit cards to buy things over the internet and have them delivered to my own house. That to me was the first problem, which was, if I were going to be committing that crime, why would I create a paper trail right to my own front door? Investigation of this case, it kind of fell apart. If you really looked at it, I had several lawyers who kind of refused to look into it. They just said you should plead to a misdemeanor and take some probation, and you should just, be happy with that. And my concern was with that, I do understand why people take plea arrangements to avoid time. But my concern back then, which was, I think, a valid one as the story progresses, we'll see why, was that if I took the misdemeanor conviction and the probation, that I would likely be violated because this would continue, because it wasn't me that was doing it. So if there were more packages or more crimes that were committed and I'm on probation, I would get doubly hammered by the court in consequent proceedings. So
you're breaking the
right
agreement.
You don't actually have to commit a crime to violate probation. You just have to be arrested. So
right.
You can be falsely arrested and still violate probation, which is, I hate that rule. I think it should be removed, but a lot of states do it. Connecticut definitely does. So I said, I think I'm setting myself up if I take a plea here, because you're not doing anything to stop this. I know who's doing it. I've told you, here's all the evidence. I mean, for example, one of the pieces of evidence was that a FedEx driver was headed to the house and he was hailed down by a woman who was about 5'8" with long brown hair. Now you can see my hair. It's not long and it's not like dark brown. That's how they described it. And you can't see me right now, but when the DMV is generous, I'm 5'1". So there's no way that anybody mistook me for a 5'8" woman.
Yeah.
And the FedEx driver actually handed the package to this person before he even got to the house. So this was a persistent question throughout the whole proceeding, which is, if all these things are being delivered, why didn't you notice them? And why didn't you report it or return it or something like that? And the thing is, my parents live at this address. I lived at this address part-time because I was at law school in New York. No one knew. There were no packages that were arriving. We didn't see anything, so we didn't know that it was happening. And as it turned out, we found out during trial, houses up and down the street were being used for the same purpose. And so I guess, the person who did it, my cousin, was going up and down the street, and I guess she would just have these things delivered to the various houses and then just drive through and pick it up. The street we live on is a very quiet dead end. So there's not a lot of people who would see that. And also if she were seen around, they might have seen her around before because she might have been at our house or something like that.
Character, yep.
So that was the essence of the trial, the charges that they brought against me. But there were a lot of other problems with the trial, namely my attorney. It became a very big case in front of the Supreme Court of the state of Connecticut about what constitutes providing effective assistance of counsel, but also malpractice. And basically the Supreme Court of Connecticut said the only way that a lawyer renders malpractice to a client is if he or she does nothing, meaning like doesn't show up, doesn't return calls, like basically just disappears with the retainer. So that's a very low standard. Basically, if you do nothing, next to nothing, if you file one paper, that's not nothing. So that gets an attorney out of a malpractice claim. It's really, in my view, a very dangerous standard that they set, but they set it in my case. Bozelko versus Papastavros is the case. And then in my habeas case, which that's a review for ineffective assistance of counsel, they said that it was fine that my attorney had actually advised the jury to convict me and also admitted on the record that she had not read the police reports.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is, I had been going to law school. I had a very idealized view of the court system and the legal system in the United States. My father was an attorney for 44 years. And, I'm used to seeing systems work as they're supposed to work, right? And if you work hard and if you tell the truth, then things will work out in your favor, at least most of the time. This was a huge wake up for me because not only did my cases kind of cement this law in place, so I felt a little bit guilty about that, pursuing them because it made it even more final. These ridiculous rules on attorney conduct and performance is that very few people have a chance. I came from a background where I came from an upper middle class family to professional parents. I went to Princeton. My two sisters, one went to Yale, the other went to Brown. We were used to success. So, and we also had resources, not as many resources lately as we wanted to have, but we were not without the wherewithal, either financially sometimes or just knowledge, right? To know that we can fight for our rights or something like that to get things done. And there are, I would say 85% of the people who I ended up being in prison with don't know about those rights, don't know that they can fight. And even when they try to, they're not always given the best performance, right? By people who are supposed to be serving them. And that ranges from court appointed lawyers, judges, social workers. I mean, I think it goes throughout the whole.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. As I mentioned earlier, I've got somebody in my life who's gone through a number of things in the system, and watching the gross misconduct that can happen is kind of, it blew my mind. I too, I was raised middle class, educated parents. I was well educated. And I think for those of us who maybe don't grow up that close to the law, you kind of assume, if it's meant to work in people's favors. And I don't think that that's the case. And the experience I've had watching somebody close to me.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't.
So I want to talk a little bit about your work in prison reform and what you started when you were in prison and what you've done since then. So first of all, you started the Prison Diaries while in prison.
Right.
What had you do that? Like there's the big question I'm so fascinated by why people do what they do, especially if it is not the standard road, right? So in my estimation, the standard road would be put your head down, go, holy crap, I can't believe I ended up here, but put your head down, get through it, get out, bury it, move on, right? We all know that there are plenty of people who have family secrets and this and that, but you said, no, I'm going to start a column and I'm going to do it while in prison. So how did that go down?
It started outside of the column. So I was late 2011. It was November,
This is
And
four years in,
so, yeah,
almost.
yeah.
Yeah.
The sinks were running and the showers were running. I guess there were washers that were loose, but it was so severe, the water wastage and also the noise abuse, because the water hitting a crappy metal drain for hours and hours, it's not even an even white noise that you can go to sleep with. It changes and everything. So I couldn't sleep, and neither could a number of women, because their sinks were constantly running, and then the showers were also running, even when off. So a roommate of mine actually took a very huge clear garbage bag and put it, underneath the faucet to see how much. And within 15 minutes, she had it filled. That's how much water they were losing every 15 minutes off of one sink. So this was really a terrible, just terrible waste, but also people were literally losing their minds from lack of sleep because they couldn't sleep at night, because you're in this tiny cell the size of a parking space and you can't get away from it. So I said to somebody else, who's another woman who had been there, and her name is Jancis Fuller. She was incarcerated in 1995 for allegedly taking a shot, shooting at a judge's home, a judge who had overseen a family matter for her extended family. And she was very familiar. She was from the area of the prison, which is New London County. I'm not from there. She was familiar with the area, having grown up there, but also was familiar with the prison. She had been there since 1995. And I said, what can we do? I filed grievances. What can we do to get these sinks fixed? And she said, oh, don't you know that there's a kind of a town gown, there's this town relationship between the prison, or the Department of Corrections, and the town of Niantic, or East Lyme as it's called, there's an agreement that the prison will never get 51% of the water in the reservoir. It always has to be the town that is the top dog in terms of how much water is drawn from that reservoir. And this was the explanation also for in the summertime when we were denied showers, because that was when people were watering lawns. Right. So they wanted to maintain a certain level in the reservoir. So they just stopped showers for inmates at certain hours in the prison. So she said, you don't know about this? And we looked it up, and actually there was an old copy in the prison library, which I don't think anyone even knew was there, or I'm sure that someone would have removed it if they knew. Mm-hmm. So we found it, and we wrote a letter to the editor of The Day, which is the New London, Connecticut newspaper, saying, look, there's this agreement, and it must be being violated if these showers and sinks are running. So what's going on here? And it was published, but we didn't know it because we don't get the paper in there. We're not allowed to see it, but it gets published. And then the Wednesday night before Thanksgiving at around 11 o'clock, my door gets, burst open. There's a team of maintenance men, lieutenants, and corrections officers who have been called back from going on their Thanksgiving weekend because they've been ordered by the warden to make sure all the sinks and the showers are fixed immediately, because the wastage is still happening right then. Yeah. And apparently someone in the town read it, got fired up. Someone contacted either the commissioner of correction or the warden and said, why are you allowing this to happen? We're supposed to get all the water. They weren't really so much worried about us and the noise as it was that we were taking their water, and they had to do that through Thanksgiving Day. And they had to go around the whole, so tier.
So you made friends real quick.
Well, that was 4 years in. They had already targeted me at that point. So I didn't feel like I was losing any friends.
Yeah.
But I realized this works. If I can get just the truth out, right? This is all I had to do was say, there's this agreement about the water, and the sinks are running in here. And once they had that piece of information outside, things changed very quickly and very definitively, right? I mean, they weren't even going to wait till the end of the Thanksgiving holiday. These people were called in, and it cost them, I'm sure, thousands of dollars in overtime. This was a big project for them. And I said, if I can do that with a little tiny letter to the editor, what could I do with bigger pieces that explain bigger issues? Yeah. And that's when I wrote to the New Haven Independent and sent them some things, and one of them did very well. And so the editor said, can you keep sending us stuff, because that piece did very well, so we can kind of work together on this. And I'm going to call it Prison Diaries. So that's where it came from. It actually didn't come from a column. It was just my understanding that opinion writing placed in the right place can actually have an effect, through government or, officials that have power.
I love how these little domino pieces fall into place, and so many of the people that I work with, they didn't necessarily set out to do what they do. They didn't necessarily, it wasn't in their grand plan for life. but life puts things in your path. And you either use it or you don't. And, you found this opportunity. So you start publishing prison diaries.
Yeah.
What's in them? I've read some of them, but I'd like you to share a bit.
They are personal essays and I would say op-ed columns describing what life is inside there and what I learned about myself and about the system. And so some of them people thought were very funny, my understanding of language that I wasn't used to, the language that is used often in the street, that kind of thing. But Prison Diaries was my way of both, I think, finally understanding my role in that prison. Because remember, there are very few people who have a college degree at all, much less have, advanced.
Princeton.
Yeah, or an advanced degree. I don't have my law degree, but I was working on it. That I started to understand my duty, right? That if I believe in God.
About that. How did that set in? Oh, this is my duty.
Immediately upon arriving, I looked different than most everyone else there. And when I say this, I've said this in other interviews, and I want to be clear to all the listeners, this is not in any way an insult. It's just the difference in how I looked compared to other women was so stark to me because I had teeth. And this is very important because to me, it was an indication of, one, the lack of care and health care that they had received throughout their lives, that if they ever did see a dentist, he or she just pulled out the tooth. They didn't try to save any teeth or do anything like that. And that's if they saw a dentist. I actually sat with a woman at a table and eating once, and her tooth came out as she was eating. So the lack of health care and dental care that these women had received throughout their lives was staggering to me, right? Because my parents were dragging me to orthodontists and periodontists and everything, and they didn't even have that.
Yeah.
So immediately, because I have teeth, I speak differently, because I'm there. When you don't have teeth, it affects how you speak, but also my diction and my words are very different I sound a lot different than most of the people there. Yeah. So I am sticking out immediately when I walk into the place. I am target number one for the staff, but also target number one for the women, and not in a bad way. They realize she's different from us. She looks different. She looks like she might know something that we don't know. Let's ask her if she can help us with reading, help filling out this form, writing a letter to a lawyer, writing something to the warden about seeing their kids, getting tax liens lifted so their kids can get, take the school bus. A litany of things. Like I don't think there's any limit to what I was asked to help with. It was usually literary, or related to reading or something like that, or explaining the handbook of the prison, it was a complete joke anyways, but there were some protections hidden in there, and I don't think that they knew how to access them. So I would say upon, like my first day there, I am being asked questions about, ma'am, do you know how to do this? Can you do this? Because I look different, right? I'm also white. Actually, the majority of women at York statistically are white, like it's like 60%, but it was clear to people that I was not the usual inmate, that this was going to be a different ride for everybody who was either working at the prison while I was there or incarcerated with me.
I'm curious about this. When I was in college, my dad was an engineer for GM. And he worked in this factory making fuel injectors, and they had a summer job program for the kids of employees to fill in some hours while people were on summer vacation. So I did that for two summers, and I went to private school my whole life, right? My parents have advanced degrees. Most of my friends' parents had advanced degrees. I had never been exposed to that point, just to working class people. Obviously, like, at the grocery store and stuff, but not spending time with them.
Yeah. And these weren't working class. So I want to be clear. These were poverty stricken women that, like, to the point that their own health was endangered.
I absolutely hear you. Here's what I'm curious about. What did you learn? Like, there's so many things I learned just spending time with those folks. I'm curious, like what you learned from these women, what you learned about them, what you learned from them. How did they change you?
One, I learned that childhood sexual abuse is probably the best predictor of a woman going to prison. All right. The studies say it's about 94%. I think they're missing part of it, but even still, that's a shocking conclusion for researchers who are very into, statistics and that kind of thing. That it's virtually all. So almost everyone had a pretty horrific story of being abused and then being disbelieved. And then, there's this whole cycle through schools. So there's the abuse to prison pipeline. We talk about the school to prison pipeline, but for young girls and school age girls, it's usually the abuse to prison pipeline because they're feeling, they either report something and they are disbelieved. So it starts a cycle of, them acting out or not trusting the system, or they are believed and they're treated like, a victim and, made fun of by other people. That was a big thing when, one woman I was incarcerated with, everyone found out that she had been raped by, I think, an uncle, because the local paper had not, the rape shield law didn't, I don't know if it was in effect then or not, or if they made a mistake, but her name was in the paper as the victim. That would not happen. That was in the 80s, early 80s, maybe even late 70s. So this was a long time before, but when somebody cut out the article and put it on a bulletin board at school, and she was immediately ostracized and made fun of, and she was an outcast basically for her whole time left in school. She was, and there was always this asterisk against her, her name, and she was believed. They arrested him. That's why it was in the paper. So this is someone who wasn't disbelieved, but she still was treated terribly. And then she ended up actually doing some time for killing someone. So you can see how the abuse, when it's not handled right, just spins out of control and spins outside of that person's world into people's worlds that have nothing to do with it, right? So her victim had nothing to do with what had happened to her, but he paid the price for it. So that was my first lesson. My second lesson was understanding how structural barriers are. Like, we always think like, oh, well, if they don't have education, if people who are going to prison aren't educated, and 68% of them don't have a high school diploma or GED. Well, let's just throw some educational resources. Let's educate them. They think that it's easy. These are people who are not used to sitting in classrooms. It's not an issue of intelligence. It's not an issue of diligence. They are simply not used to sitting in these situations and understanding what the traditional definition of success is, the definition of success that everyone else is going to seize on: good grades, getting to the next level, whatever that is, that kind of thing. They're not used to it. When I would work in the kitchen when I was in prison, I used to tell people, why. First of all, I actually liked doing that. It was the first time I had ever done manual labor. It got me out of my cell. I was actually very grateful. Everyone puts prison labor down, but I'm very grateful for it. Is I would tell my supervisors, I'm shocked. These women don't know how to work hard. It's not that they were lazy. It was not that they didn't have ethics or want to do well. They didn't know that if you go the extra mile, you might get an extra benefit, or it might, create a perception in your employer that you're more reliable. So when there is a problem down the road, you get the benefit of the doubt. They didn't understand any of that because they had never seen that in action. That was a big thing for me, is to understand that, they really don't know. And because they've been denied this knowledge, right? It's not because they've refused it, or they've never seen it modeled or rarely seen it modeled. And they also, they don't understand that if they work a little bit harder, that they might get some benefit, because so many times probably when they did try, they were treated badly. So they're starting to associate effort, or, like really digging in and studying or something like that. They're associating that with failure. So it's not worth it. So, I think this is really important in this whole debate that's going on now about the unemployment benefits. Because this whole idea is like, that people, if they don't want to work, it's because they're lazy. I actually don't believe that. I think that they're either hip to the game and they're saying, I'm not going back into that, or they don't know how. They don't understand that it's actually better in the long run if you can get off unemployment and get a paying job, and that because unemployment is not going to give you a raise. It's not going to give you a promotion. And there are ways, if you did take a job, that you can actually advance your life. And I don't want to group everyone who's collecting unemployment benefits into one monolith. That's not true. But I do think that a lot of the ways we talk about work and the lack of work, and especially as it relates to entitlements, is very uninformed.
You mentioned prison labor. and how you were grateful for it. I know there's a lot of conversation around prison labor, especially as it relates to basically modern enslavement. What's your take on that? How do you position, where do you sit in relationship to that, or given your experience, what do you see?
I'm probably the only person who's willing to be public about this opinion, but I see the value of prison labor. I don't dispute that it descended from convict leasing and slavery. I don't dispute that. And what I try to explain to people is that it's an activity that inmates would not otherwise be allowed to, engage in. The other option is to sit in a cell. So why not do something that takes up their time, takes up their attention? Like they can learn maybe a few skills, but not too many. Most prison labor is pretty menial. So I think most people knew how to sweep floors or wash something beforehand. Is that there was a certain amount of freedom. The idea, just the thought of losing my prison job would have probably made me suicidal, because it was, like I said, my exit out of the daily, the housing unit daily. I lucked out. I happened to have exceptional supervisors who, worked with me and, protected me when a guard wanted to be a jerk or harass me or something like that. So I understand that not everyone has had the same set of circumstances that I did, but I did feel that this, what I call it is, prison labor was a curriculum in mattering. Somewhere else, someone else was sweeping a floor or mopping a floor or cleaning something or even scrubbing a toilet. It was actually an activity that I would have done or could have done when I was free. So for me, it was very freeing in that respect, because I didn't feel like, not too many people are sitting in a tiny cell, going to the bathroom 2 feet from their cellmate because that's how small the cell is. That's not a natural, typical activity for someone. Whereas cleaning or, vacuuming or packing up things in the commissary, that's something that someone somewhere else who's free was also doing. So it kind of leveled us up, I think, in a way. And I get a lot of responses because when I speak publicly and I say, I think we should, expand prison labor, pay it a little bit better, but understand what the gifts are that actually come from this. I get a lot of flack from people who've never done time, but I also have people who come to me very quietly and say, I can't be public about this, but I agree with you. When I was in prison, I also was really grateful for my job. It did a lot for me. I had a supervisor who helped me in this way. It taught me a work ethic, things like that. It's so impolitic to say that the prison labor helped anybody, that we're actually not getting anywhere in terms of prison labor. I think if you really worked a prison labor program really hard and made it fair and, taught a lot of skills and got people really understanding, their value as an employee and that they can do things, I think you would see a great reduction in recidivism. But because, if you say, let's beef up prison labor, you're going to get a lot of people really reacting to you.
Yeah. Yeah. You spent time in solitary, including one stint that I think you said was 30 days.
30 days was the longest. Yeah.
So I slept years ago. I slept in solitary in on Alcatraz.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So they had this lottery, and you can go through the Park Service, and friend of a friend got it. He's like, let's go to Alcatraz overnight. So we did. And it was really interesting. But you sleep in a cell that night. Right. And it's freaky. And that's with somebody who is free, who's not actually in a working prison, who can walk out at any moment.
Yeah.
But it is pitch black.
Yeah. No daylight.
So I'm curious about a couple of things. I'm curious, like how you manage your mental health, your sanity. I'm also curious, like what demons did you have to face? I read somewhere like you went in, you were angry as a kid, or you went in with some anger issues. And I'm curious, like, was that a place where you had to face yourself? What happened there for you?
I was more frightened because when I first went in, that was the 30-day stint. I didn't know if I was getting out. Because remember, I'm a target. So I am because I'm filing complaints and I'm, helping people actually get their medications changed or something. This is something that they don't want. And I don't want to impugn every correctional employee. I think that's unfair, but I do want to say, like, not that many people stood up for me and said, let this woman, like, she's not really doing anything bad. More towards the end of my time in prison, I could hear people saying, like, leave her alone. She's only trying to help. Like, there's really no bad intention here. She's not trying to get anyone fired. That was never my intention. It was just to make sure that people had what they needed. So when I went in, I was really scared because I thought they could, what they call, classify me to solitary, which means that you live there, right? You just permanently, let's call it administrative segregation. They do it to people they suspect of being in gangs. If you have a really, really bad disciplinary record, they can do that to you. There's a lot of laws that are actually, people are trying to pass them right now that would limit that and say the maximum time you can ever spend in solitary is 2 weeks. But I also knew from being there at that time that what they do is they try to, it's not a hard and fast rule. The United Nations says anything over 14 days is torture. So what they do is they keep you in for 14 days, let you out for a day, put you back in. So right. No one on the books is being shown to have been inside that unit, the solitary unit, in that restricted housing for more than 14 days. But they can, under certain circumstances, keep you there. And the process by which you get put there, there's no due process. You have no representation. You have no nothing. And an officer can come in and completely make up a story about you. And they're going to say, okay, he's right. And you're going there forever. So my real fear was, will I ever get out of here prior to my ultimate release? That was the first fear. Because I didn't know. And you don't even get any like notice. Like I would just have been taken to this quote unquote hearing where they would decide if I was going to be stuck there for the rest of my time. And I would have, like I said, no preparation, no advocate there for me, no knowledge of even what I was going to be defending myself against. And so it was kind of a kangaroo court. It was a lost cause. So that was a big fear of mine. But I also, for me, the worst part of solitary was the lack of bathing. So you're allowed to shower 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you only get one outfit. So what you put in on Fridays and what you put on Fridays after your shower, you will wear 24 hours a day until the next outfit the next week. Now, I know people rewear clothes. I don't wash every pair of pants after I wear them, but to wear the same clothing 24 hours a day for a week is filthy. I mean, most people actually don't experience it. Maybe if they're in a severe depression, they might, but most healthy, functioning people have not experienced it. It's terrible. They didn't have any deodorant, so I could smell myself. When it was really, for me, that was the worst part, because not only are you alone, you're alone with a person who smells, who is filthy, who, so to me, that was the worst. And it really reminded me of a lot of stories that I had read about the Holocaust and how they used to, the whole thing with the showers is that these people would run towards the showers because they felt so filthy and they were so excited to get washed, and then they were running gleefully to their own death. I think that's one of the worst instances of evil that I could even imagine. And it got even, it really hit me while I was in solitary that this is what people went through. So that for me was the worst. I mean, you get like a little tiny like corner of soap. You have a barely working sink in your cell. I mean, there's really no way to even be really resourceful and creative about staying clean. So they know that you're going to feel dirty and you're going to feel, you'll turn against yourself, right? You'll hate yourself. And that's what's going to keep people in control. And there's also, it's very loud. People are screaming. They are talking to each other between the cells. So it's not even like, couldn't even be a restful place where you could, just sleep the hours away or anything. So that I do agree with the UN. It is torture. I don't think people should be required to live in those conditions. I do think that the reforms are overdue, but I also think they're pretty minor. I don't know if you followed at all. Rikers Island is trying to reform this, but basically what they're doing is letting people come out into a cage right outside the solitary cell. So what they're saying is they're letting people out for the day, but you're literally in a chain link like corral that's right around the door of your cell. That's not a real reform, right? People need to be able to move around, get fresh air, that kind of thing. So I think that I'm starting to conclude, especially after I've been home 7 years now, I did, 6 inside, 13 years of really understanding this, is that I don't think we're gonna get solitary confinement out of this. Like, I just think this whole system is designed to depend on it too much. So I don't think that they are creative enough or the staff willing enough to think differently about this. So my thing is that, like, I don't think solitary is going away, but I do think that we need to just send fewer people into prison who would eventually be subjected to that. That's how you really stop solitary.
Let me ask you, so these days you're a prison reform advocate, you're a journalist, you do a lot. What are some of the big initiatives that you're focused on right now? Like what are I know you did work in Texas, got the Prison Rape Elimination Act, helped get that passed with Abbott.
No, I got it that the state of Texas would comply. And I actually didn't work down in Texas. That was just something that I wrote that the governor read.
Okay, got it.
So kind of like the letter, the letter about the water. I really think I've learned how to triangulate the press, myself, and a target, right? A government agency or a government actor or something like that to get them to do the right thing. And I have found that this is very effective.
How do you think about that? We'll get back to what you're working on, but a lot of the folks that I work with do change work, and are seeking to change systems. So I love that you found like, here's a tool, right? When I can find the right player and the right outlet with the right approach, I can get things moving.
Yes.
Tell me a little how you think about I'm always curious about how people process it, what they're thinking, what their thinking process is behind what they do. When you're looking at an issue and you want to perhaps be a voice of change for it, what's your process?
It depends on if it's a national issue or a regional issue. If it's a regional issue, if it's not Connecticut, I try to talk to people in that state or that, area, if it's a municipality, and find out what's going on. And then I very carefully craft an opinion piece that calls for the movement that I want. And then place it in a place where I know the person who's in charge, whoever that is, the commissioner, the governor, whoever it is, will see it. Right. Because I also know that this is how press offices work. So someone who works for the governor or even a representative down in Washington from Wyoming is going to look at the Wyoming papers every day and find out what's being said.
Right.
And so also I went through the op-ed project. I got out in March of 2014, and then I went and I did a seminar at the op-ed project, and I work for them now. I facilitate workshops when we're allowed to be all together. And they have a very strong track record of people coming through and placing just one op-ed and getting amazing results. In terms of, we had someone who wrote one about her family being killed in a drone strike, and the Department of Defense said, yeah, you're right. You made the case, mea culpa. We're like, we did this, right? That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah,
we've had laws changed. We've had like a ton of things. So it really does work in terms of the opinion pages and their kind of singularity in a news source, and the fact that leaders are going to look there because not only do they need to know what's happening, but they need to know what experts think about it and how they're going to digest all that stuff. And that's where they go. So there's really not any type of, leader's office that isn't not only consuming news, but also really concentrating on opinion pages, because that's where the real explanation of what's supposed to happen, that's going to be explained on those pages.
Awesome. That's really interesting. Tell me a little bit about some of the things that you're most proud of in terms of some of the work you've been able to be a part of, and what matters most to you right now. Like, what are you working on now?
Right now, I am actually working on a new way of doing journalism. And I can't say too much more about it because we're actually in a like development phase, but I have noticed now, working in this field for 7 years, actually before, because I was in, New Haven Independent worked with me while I was inside, is that the way we're doing this, the way we're financing news doesn't work. So this whole idea of either ads or subscriptions, we're not thinking beyond that. That's what we need to go beyond. The local paper here, or not super local, the paper of record in Connecticut, the Hartford Courant, was part of the group that was purchased by Alden Capital Management a few weeks ago. They're expecting that a good number of people will be laid off, and that, like, coverage will be slashed, and eventually these places will be kind of like sold for parts type thing. And it's not just the Current, which is the longest running daily in the country. I guess there were other papers that are older but didn't continuously run. The Current has published a newspaper every day for hundreds of years. So that would be a real loss to the country's history, but it's also very eminent. And I started to think, because I have friends who work there, and a couple who jumped ship and got out, and then others who are stuck. They're very loyal and really, like, they're star reporters, but they don't know what their future is that everyone was hoping that some billionaire, I forget his name, one's from Sweden, then there were other people who owned a hotel chain. Which billionaire can we convince to buy this newspaper chain and save us? And I thought, this is a crazy way to look at this. We're still going back to billionaires and the people that have a ton of power and a ton of money to get us out of it. We are not taking hold of this ourselves. The journalists should be in charge. So I have a team of people. We're probably going to launch an app sometime this year. Not definite on the details, but I've noticed that the way that we're doing it doesn't work. I also noticed that literally, I think that the media or news is probably the only industry where everybody hates a part of it, right? So the consumers of it don't either distrust it or think it's not covering this enough or that enough or whatever it is. And even the people who work in it have all these complaints and say, this is terrible and that's terrible, and there's all these problems. So basically everyone agrees that the media in the United States needs to be changed, and no one really knows how to change it.
Uh-huh. Well, I'll have to see if you're willing to come back on once you can share more
I will absolutely
about that, because that sounds fascinating. I'm super curious. I will keep my curiosity at bay for the moment. What do you think we should be focusing on most in prison reform? What do you think is not being talked about in prison reform?
So I want to break down what the difference between justice reform and prison reform. So the way that I've come to understand it, and no one taught me this, it's just from working through this and reading so much about it, is that there's this concept of justice reform that governs, like, why people go to prison, the processes through which, whether they're racist, whether they are fair, whether they are fully funded. And then also the supervision at the end, like probation and parole, which can be really problematic, as we started this conversation talking about, like just an arrest, even a false arrest, can get someone violated and sent back to prison. So that's considered justice reform. Prison reform is generally considered what can be done to things inside that would actually reduce recidivism or make them safer or more humanizing or things like that. So I have, on justice reform, I think the biggest thing is just generally getting fewer people to go in. I was very concerned when I first got out, because I had just come out of this, environment, that if we change the things inside these facilities, that things will be better. Having advocated for change and written about it and studied it and talked to wardens and people who work in this, I think change is going to come very, very slowly inside, in such a way that I think the best way is to just make sure people don't even ever have to experience it. The unions are very, very strong in every state that represent correctional officers, and they really do fight any type of reform. I mean, these solitary reforms, for solitary confinement, they're fought tooth and nail by corrections unions, even though there's a lot of evidence that shows that this is actually bad for them too. Because when you cage somebody within a cage and treat them terribly, they tend to get almost animalistic in some of their behaviors. So a lot of times there's violence, like when they get let out. Mm-hmm. So it keeps them safer, but they still don't want to do it because they like the power that they have in these systems. So, I mean, I'm getting very practical. I was very idealistic when I first came out in 2014. Right now, I think the most important thing is justice reform. How do you keep people out? Not send them. If there's any other alternative to how to handle a case, do that. And then also making sure they don't go back for something stupid. I mean, I just wrote I think it was in January, about a man here in Connecticut who he had reported to his parole officer properly. The officer had saved the wrong phone number for him. So the officer was texting the wrong number, trying to check on him and not getting a response. And so the last connection that he had with his parole officer was, I'll contact you. Don't do anything. Just keep doing what you're doing, working. He was running a youth basketball league. He was doing all this terrific stuff, going to school. So he's just waiting for the parole officer to get back in touch with him, but he doesn't hear. And so the parole officer's texting the wrong guy, or, a non-working number, not getting a response. He simply went and got a warrant for him for a parole violation. They pulled guns on him outside of a vitamin store in Stamford. He's running a juice business, like a smoothie business. He was getting supplies. He had no idea that the officer was trying to get in touch with him. The officer didn't even go to his home. He hadn't changed residences. It was easy enough to prove that this guy was still doing what he was supposed to be doing. And he had to be held for, I think it was 2 months during COVID, when this virus is raging through correctional facilities, until a state senator intervened on his behalf and got him a very fast parole hearing, where the parole officer, to his credit, did admit that it was his mistake. But that was already 2 months in. He could have caught COVID. He could have died. There was so many risks associated with it. So those are the two areas where I say, if you really want to reform the system, go to the places where you just keep people out, because it's such a black box what's in there. And there's the people who have the power are probably going to keep the power, so that even if when you make a step forward, it's not that big of a step, and it can be easily erased.
Got it. Well, let's spend this last bit talking a little bit about you and kind of your journey. I'm always curious what crafts someone into the person that does what they do. And I'm curious, if you look at the life you lived, how, even before going to prison, if you were to say here's some of the stuff I struggled with, here's what kind of shaped me, what would you say about that?
I would say I was a very privileged and unaware, definitely not woke person prior to prison. I thought that things would always work out for me. I thought things were a given. I would have described myself as a relatively liberal person, but I also really had no idea. I'm almost embarrassed at the person I was in terms of understanding other people's stories, and actually even understanding that other people had stories. So in that sense, I was so self-absorbed. I don't think anybody who knew me then would ever say, oh, she was such a diva. That's not what I was like. But knowing myself, I know that I was not attuned to other people at all. Maybe my family, but this was all successful people. So what did I know, except, maybe that we fought every once in a while. And then when I got in and started to hear other people's stories, I started to understand that some of the things that had happened in my extended family were completely not normal. To be honest with you, it's not my immediate family, but the extended family is basically a form of organized crime. My cousin had died when I was 14. There are some questions surrounding that, but was always the going story was that he had died of a allergic reaction to what? This question was never answered. There were other issues with, other people's performance in school. There were clearly behavioral problems, and we were so convinced of our own type of perfection that no one questioned any of this and said, why? Well, if we're so great, why is that happening? If we're so great, then why is this happening? And if we have this money, but why do we have no one? I was a kid. I don't beat myself up for it. When you're 8, you're not supposed to be answering these questions. But only when I started to hear other people's stories that I said, you know what, that actually something like that happened to me too. My father had a problem with alcohol. He's now in recovery, but we didn't actually think of it that way, even though it was very clear, because that doesn't happen to people like us. Yeah. So I think that my understanding of myself probably never would have ever occurred if I hadn't gone to prison. Yeah. Now, I don't want to say that I'm grateful for it, but I also know that I would have been probably what they describe as a Karen.
Yep.
These days, if I hadn't gone. And I also would not, I've uncovered some unusual statistics and done some reporting and research that no one else has. And I think that there was something destined to bring what talents and background I had to this industry, prison industrial complex, and get some things done and open up some conversations that might not otherwise have happened. So I do think that there was some type of reason for it. I don't, I believe in God. I do believe that maybe he thought, Bozelko, number 3304445, you haven't been listening.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to now you're going to listen. I'm getting your attention this way. So I think that it worked that way. And I think that he brought out certain changes in the rules and the way that we do things in prisons through me. They're minor, the things getting fixed and the Texas deciding to comply with the Prison Rape Elimination Act, but they needed to be done. And to get them done by one person is actually, to my credit, right? It's a good thing. The story that I tell when I kind of describe like my own evolution is when I was going through all this and fighting my charges, my family, they were helpful in the sense that they didn't want me to go to prison and they loved me, but they were not willing to listen to my denials or take what I was saying seriously. And they put me through serious paces with the mental health system. I have said this repeatedly that I would trust the prison industrial complex far greater than I do the mental health system, because it was just really abusive. I've written about it. I was conserved, just like Britney Spears. I mean, I had rights taken away. I am highly distrustful of psychiatry and psychology at this point, although I do attend my own weekly therapy session. So I know that I need some type of balance and treatment still, but the way that I was treated was pretty bad. And I was praying in my cell one night and I said, God, if you can just make sure that no one knows that I was here, I'll do extra years. You can actually keep me here longer. That whatever situation you need to bring about, so that I'll do 10 years if no one would know that I'm here. And I thought, are you kidding? You've been fighting and saying you're not crazy to all these people who are trying to tell you that you're crazy and you committed these crimes. And that was crazy. That prayer you just sent up is completely delusional and nuts, that you are willing to give up more freedom so that you can erase and no one will know that you had this problem. And that was really kind of an insight. Like my way of thinking and the way that I was brought up, and this expectation of, suburban perfection and, there will never be, everything's sunny every day is ridiculous. And it's gotten me to the point that I'm thinking in really screwed up ways. So I need to reevaluate.
Yeah. I love that you say, hey, I'm not exactly sure how this was all set up, but somewhere going like there's something to this. One of the things I often talk about with clients is like, who can you bridge to? Like, who can you speak to that other people can't speak to? And that's always a clue into like where you can have leverage and where you can have influence in the world to do good. And, for you to say, okay, to go from, please God, extra time is fine. Just sweep it under the rug. Thank you very much. To being front and center in the conversation. One of the things that I find a lot of people are scared of is the consequences of sharing what they're here to share, the consequences of saying yes to the invitation, right? You wrote one piece about the water, right? Had these guys and maybe gals working through Thanksgiving, said, aha, there's something here, right? I think I can use this.
Yeah.
Right. And you've continued to do that since then. What did you have to face inside of yourself to be willing to go, I'm going to start telling my story publicly? Like, I'm not going to tell it to the neighbor or my friend, or I'm going to do it in the local newspaper, right? Like, that's where I'm going to start. I'm like, given your upbringing, was there stuff you had to work through? How did you make peace with that?
I think that this tension between wanting to kind of expunge the entire social record of what happened to Chandra, and then also having an effect. I think you can worry about the consequences of your actions, but you should also probably worry about being inconsequential, right? Mm-hmm. So basically in that prayer, make sure this never happened. Nobody knows. Like that Men in Black, the little squeezy thing that they do to blight everyone's memory after they've appeared. that would make me inconsequential, right? Or at least, this whole event. And that's just like it's not terrific to have bad consequences. It's also not terrific to be inconsequential, right?
Right.
And that's what I said, like, if I'm going to be a person of consequence in any way, it's got to be this way. And I have to talk about it, and people will listen. Let's be honest. People will listen when the whole Princeton to prison that every newspaper used to describe me or whatever, it gets attention and it attracts people. I reached out to Bloomberg's campaign when he was running last year and said, I was in prison. Can I help? And they said, yep, because this is too good of a story and too much. So come on and help us work out the criminal justice platform and also the violence against women platform, because that had the Prison Rape Elimination Act in it. And so, like it opens doors. I have a key that other people don't have. And I really feel like it's probably immoral not to use it. Definitely unethical, because there's some system that set this up in a way that I can unlock doors for myself and for other people. And also for my personal thing, I started to matter. And I think that probably what kept me so self-centered before prison was that I actually didn't think that I did matter, or I thought I only mattered in certain kind of really silly ways, right? Like who went out to which bar, or like things that I couldn't even think twice about now. Or who's dating who, or that kind of thing. That stuff doesn't matter to me anymore, because I feel like I've achieved in a certain way and had an impact on the world.
Yeah. I'm curious, as you continue to navigate your journey, if there is is there a inner voice that guides you? Is there is it seeing stuff out there in the world that is like, no, I see a way to help change that? And, or I'm sure it is that, but I'm also curious if there's like an inner light that guides you when you talk about I think there was something to the arrangement of all of this. Is there something in that continues to speak to you or animate you or guide you today?
Yeah. I mean, I've written about this. I was raised a Catholic. My parents brought my sisters and me to church all the time, confirmation, all of that. And then when I went to college, I didn't really care about it. I had an aunt, Nancy Roach was her name, she's my mother's older sister, who was devoutly Catholic and probably the best person who's ever walked this earth. I mean, we talk about forgiving and truly understanding the meaning of, love thy neighbor like thyself, really was an excellent person. And she actually wasn't bothered by the fact that I had said, no, church isn't for me, because she knew, she would say, don't worry, he'll get you, you'll come back and whatever. And she didn't know. She actually died a year before I went to prison. And she was actually one of my supporters. She was one of the people who was telling my parents, leave her alone. You need to listen to her, that kind of thing. So when I lost her a year before all the final decision, the final trial and everything, that was huge. That was that was the one voice in my defense, and I lost her for good. So I usually, I don't do the, what would Jesus do? But I do ask, what would Nancy do in a certain situation? And I've often said in the past 4 years that I'm almost glad that she passed away prior to Trump presidency, because I think she would have blown a gasket. She probably would have had a stroke over all this. She was very political. She used to go to all different marches. I know she would have been at the Women's March, that kind of thing. So that, I rediscovered my faith while I was inside, because there was such a chaplain who was so charismatic and brilliant and good. His name was Dennis Dolan. He's actually retired now. He lives down in Florida, but his sermons were really good and really got to me. There is not, talk about someone who was made for that job. The man who was made to talk to women in a maximum security prison and get their attention and get them to start looking at themselves is Dennis Dolan. And so I used to go to church church for Catholics in prison is on Saturdays. I would go to mass every Saturday, talk to Deacon Dolan. And I remember thinking, Nancy would be proud of me, Nancy, and she would also be pleased that she was right. Not that I don't think she ever doubted that she was right, but when she used to say, that's okay, you don't have to go to church, you'll return some day. I don't think she knew that it was going to be in the hallway of a prison industrial building, but I did. And so what Nancy used to do, and the ways that she used to react to people and conduct her life, that is a very important guide for me. And then also when I see these holes, like people start to talk about prison escapes. Remember in 2015, the big escape from Dannemora? We had 2 escapes at York while I was there, shockingly enough, within 1 month of a new warden taking over. It was probably he probably regretted that career move more than anything. But so I was on CNN talking about that and explaining like how prisons work and why this was so unusual, what had happened there. So when I see these opportunities to educate, I'm thinking about Nancy and also like, how can I get myself into this conversation and also have people recognize that there are people behind those walls. They will come out. 95% of people who are in prison will come home one day. And what do you want them to be looking like, talking like, acting like? And I want to do that for them so that, the one coming behind me will do just as well as I do.
Beautiful. Hey, Chandra, thank you so much. This has been a rich conversation. I love when people take the opportunity to go, okay, here's what I've got. What am I going to do with it? And if anybody's listening to this and going, all right, what do I have? What's the key that I'm holding? You saw the key you were holding and you've chosen to use it. And for everybody listening, I think, we can all ask ourselves, like, where are holes I can fill? What are keys that I'm holding? And who can I serve?
Yeah.
So thank you.
And everyone can matter. That's another thing, is like, everyone can matter. If you're feeling like you don't matter, there is absolutely a way within your reach to matter and to deserve positive attention, whether it's just in your workplace or on the global stage. Everyone can.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Chandra.
You are welcome.
You are a delight. I appreciate it. And we'll have you back when we're able to learn more.
I'm counting on it because we have a big announcement.
All right. Thanks so much.
Right. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Hey there, thanks so much for listening in. If this conversation was powerful, if it stirred your soul or inspired your journey, then be sure to share it with a friend. Just copy and paste the link wherever you're listening to this podcast and text that link right now to a friend that you think would be inspired by this episode. And if this is your first time here, be sure to click that subscribe button over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and I'd really appreciate it if you'd leave a rating and review so I can get to know you and your thoughts better. To learn more about the work I do with emerging and established paradigm changers, go to thecourageousmessenger.com. That's all for today. Thanks so much for being here, and I hope to see you in the next episode.